my life.
Hello, how's it going? Bonnie Violet here. I'm a trans femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain. And in case you don't know where you are, you've found yourself at Dragon Spirituality. I'm super excited for us to be having this interview here in a little bit. For folks who've never been here before, this is kind of like where a drag show meets I guess an interview or a podcast, if you will. So feel free to engage with us. If you joined us live, you could be watching us on YouTube or Facebook. Feel free to make comments. We'll engage with you as much as we can. If you're listening to or watching after the fact, please still engage with us. We'd love to hear from you and get connected with you. So I'm not going to belabor this anymore. I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
Good.
Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Layah Louder. I hail from Chicago, Illinois, in Andersonville, for any Chicagoites out there, if that's what they call them. I am America's favorite Jewish Godex. Yeah, I use she, they pronouns in drag, or any, depends on the number. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing that little introduction. I was excited when you reached out to me and said you were interested in participating in this, so I'm eager to get to know you a little bit more. I usually have the same first question, and that question is, I would love for you to tell me a little bit about what you were taught or what you came to know as a young person about religion or spirituality.
Yeah, so I grew up in a world where religion was my whole world. I grew up in a Jewish religious school where I did the whole like consecration, which is where you like get to like decorate a Torah and be like, this is my cute little Torah that I have. To confirmation, where you get to like lead a service. But then before that, I had my B'nai mitzvah, which is like B'nai is like a gender neutral term, instead of bar or bat. Another term that's being thrown around right now is Kabbalat mitzvah, which one of the schools I work for uses. So I had my B'nai mitzvah, then I did confirmation, and then I was always really involved in Jewish youth group, and I was like the religious and cultural vice president of one of my temples, and my dad was worked for a religious school, and my aunt was a rabbi, and so was my uncle, and so I came from like a whole wealth of like very like spiritual intellects.
And was that something that you enjoyed as well? Like, what was your attitude or feeling about it?
Yeah. So in high school we had this school called Kulanu, which was like an extracurricular where you could like learn about Judaism in a way that was relevant to the whole world. And I like my parents gave me like a chance to be like, okay, like you can stop now or keep going. And I was like, why would I stop? It was always one of those things where I was like, this is like something that I enjoy. And like, honestly, like even like I went to a performing arts high school, but going to like religious school and like youth group and stuff, like that was the place I could like run around and be gay.
Awesome. Yeah, that was going to be my question. I think a lot of people maybe, or some people would have made assumptions that maybe your queerness and however way that played out might not jive well in that space, but it doesn't sound like that was your experience at all.
Yeah, these like big youth group conventions were the places where I could like put on my baggy cargo shorts and like feel like a boy and like feel butch and like but also just like play with makeup and stuff. Like I feel like a sort of drag of my childhood was Kate Menig from the L Word, and like dressing like her all the time, and I'd wear this like thick back like black like eyeliner, and that's why I feel like punk and is like a lot of like part of my drag too, is like just like the feeling of like rebellion stuff has always been like a part of my style. So yeah, I would like dress up to go to these conventions, and I'd be like, where are all the nice Jewish gays and theys? Because when they would like separate people into like boys go here and girls go there, like didn't matter like where they would put me, like I don't know, I was always probably like snooping around trying to like get with a little Jewish girl like on the side, because like these were the places where like to explore that.
And how was that for you? Because I know like in a lot of religious settings, gendered things are kind of gendered as far as like what you can do, what you can't do. And so how did you navigate that? It sounds like to me like this stuff just was like it never was like a challenge for you. Was it in any way, or?
I think honestly, the biggest challenges that I've faced with being a religious person has been being an out religious queer person in my adult life, trying to relate to other queer people who were not Jewish. Like I I was with someone who wasn't particularly like religious, and like a lot of their friends like just had really negative experiences of religion, and so we would like all go around like say like what you do for a living, and like I'm a religious school teacher, and I feel like it would like get to me, and I'd feel like almost like embarrassed to talk about my job in a way. But I think mostly in my adult life it sort of felt like, I don't know, like I also like went to a very like rural kind of college area where like like when Trump was elected, like I like heard people like celebrating, and so like I lived in this world where I either was explaining my religion, and so that in that way like I wasn't like I was too religious, or I lived in a world where like I wasn't like I was like not like queer enough or something because I was religious. But yeah.
Well, you were almost a different kind of queer within like a queer environment. I definitely understand what that. I've definitely had that experience a lot throughout my, spiritual life, especially as a queer person, where people are just like, they don't understand it. Can you talk a little bit about maybe why people, I guess there's that separation, or what you're, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with trauma and negative experiences, and also like quite frankly like a lot of like the harm that has been done in the Catholic Church, which creates an overwrite around like all religion in general sometimes. And I do feel like funny sometimes when when I'll be like, I'm religious, like, oh, and then be like, I'm Jewish, and then people will be like, oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Like why is my religion the thing that makes all religion more okay, when like like I like have a friend who grew up in a world where like they were always like helping their mom with like youth group and stuff, and like their mom is like still involved in the church and stuff, and like there's like gay churches out there too,
Right.
and like I don't know a lot about that world from other than like what I've seen on TV, but yeah.
Is the Jewish tradition in general more inclusive of queer folks, whether it's gender or sexuality?
Well, it depends what sect you asked.
Okay.
For
That'd be my assumption, but can you
sure,
tell us
for
more
sure.
about that?
Yeah, for sure. The thing that I love the most about how like my identity like integrates with my gender is like it's very indigenous. Like, and I heard a rabbi use that word to describe it. It's like queer people have been in the Torah. And trans people have been in the Torah through the eyes of God. Um, like since the dawn of time. Like there are 8 genders in the Tanakh, which is like the translation of the Torah, and like um one of them, a couple of them being like androgynous and like talking about the idea of having mixed genitalia. And so there's like the physical in relationship to the spiritual that is indigenous. I heard a rabbi speak about there's a story where someone was like pregnant with 2 children, and like one of the children like was like an intersex child, and they had to like decide what to do with the child. Like the thing about the Torah that I think is so cool is that there are so many untold stories, and there are so many stories that um haven't been tapped into. And it makes me think about like, you know, whatever kind of rabbi you are says a lot about what stories you choose to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's something when you're growing up, oftentimes you don't realize, or you can kind of make assumptions that like one way to be a Jew is the way everyone's a Jew, or the way somebody's a Christian, everybody's the same type of Christian. And I think that was definitely something for me that it took me it took me getting into other churches or being in other places to actually begin to see. I mean, it's interesting because I was never taught, because I was taught in the way that I was taught. I never saw that there were Black and brown people in the Bible, or that there were queer people, until I started to get to other places where I could hear people talk about it. And it's like, duh, of course there is. Like, you know what I mean? But it was like, but the way that things were framed, and in my perception, mainly having to do with where I grew up and who was around me, I was just looking for myself. You know what I mean? Like, and just assumed everybody was like me in that as well. How about drag? When did drag come into things for you?
Drag in some ways is old and some ways new. I feel like when I talk to a lot of like other trans people, like we talk a lot about like the parts of our lives that have felt like drag, and being able to tap into that. I remember like I was like in the beginning of coming out like trans to my mom. She was like, I don't understand. Like you were always into like makeup and like the Barbies and like the girly stuff and whatever, and like being able to like still like be the center of attention. And I was like, well, I don't really think those things have changed.
Right.
So I think that like there's always like has been this part of me that like I grew up in the theater world like from the age of 5, like where the idea of like a 4 or 5 show season was like very normal for me. Just like cranking it out, and like the feeling and like the visceral smell of like putting on like caked makeup, and like the feeling of like taking it on and taking it off, and like it was something that like I loved. And like feeling tired like from actually like really working hard is something that I fell in love with at a really young age. And then I as like my like self out of drag produced this one person show about the intersection of my gender and Judaism, and I toured the show. And then all of a sudden everyone started like casting me like as a non-binary person, like as myself, and I was doing like a lot of education around it. And I just got so tired of like telling my story in this way where I had to like bare my soul in this really like, I don't know, like high sensitive way. And my story got taken advantage of in many different ways and manipulated. And I think like in the pandemic, I took a break and I couldn't perform. And then I
Yeah.
was like, what do I really care about? And that's when I fell into teaching. And then I'd always sort of admired drag queens from afar.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw an opportunity with a Jewish organization that I worked for called Keshet. And shout out to them. You should totally look
Yes.
them up. And um, I got offered to do drag in like a very for Pride in a very rural area in this in Illinois. And so I had my friend who's my drag dad now, Daddy Carrot, put me into drag, and I took this weird little car out there where we got lost. And I remember the feeling of like I walked into these picket signs of like people like shitting on religion, like,
Mm.
and it was very like God hates um and whatever, and like, so the visceral feeling of like the that sense of old, of that
Mm.
smell of the caking on of makeup,
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
walking through that like into the pickup sign, the picket signs, and like with a face of glitter, and
Mm.
like having like kids like rush up to me and be
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you look so cool. It like made me feel like there's a world where I want to combine everything I love into
Yeah, yeah.
something. But yeah.
Yeah. Tony says that Tony loves the podcast and we have some amazing looks tonight. So thank you so much. So glad you could join us, Tony. And then Evan does have a question. Um, Evan says the term non-binary seems limited when it comes to identifying oneself when there are more than two genders in the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, I don't even like, I think that in general, like, at least probably personally, like, I don't even know how much non-binary like I identify with, like,
Hmm.
and I think that was really hard for me coming out too, because people would be like, oh, non-binary, that means like you don't want to be seen, you don't want to be like put in any sort of category. But like,
Category.
I like gender. I
Hmm.
think gender is like fun, and there's so much to like play with. And I like my relationship to my gender is very full, and there are a lot of words out there, and you'd be surprised like how much like little kids know too. And I
Hmm.
love like asking like kids how they describe their gender, or there's an activity that I want to do with a group of Jewish trans kids that I work with, where they have to like build their gender
Hmm.
out of like recycled materials or something in order to like express it. So I guess like for this person, like, to answer your question, like, I don't know, your gender could be anything from like a dog to a like a woman to like a bi gender. I don't know. I just think like there are lots of words out there,
Hmm.
and like if you don't see one, like you can make it up because your identity is yours, and like
Right.
that's what matters.
Well, and I think oftentimes, like words are supposed to kind of like define certain things, but it all still kind of depends on your interpretation and your understanding. It's kind of like I might say like I wouldn't necessarily say I'm non-binary. Part of that is just because I feel like that's kind of a academic, like I have my reasons, right? But I do identify as genderqueer, in the sense that I don't feel like I want to like I don't buy into, if you will, that there's certain norms that, and only men and women, and they have certain norms and that sort of thing. So I think the term non-binary in general is just um, outside of that basic uh, assumption, maybe of what a binary does, and
Mhm.
so that can be the fact that you're not either male or female, or for some people it's that you're a combination of both, like, so it really just kind of depends, I think, on your understanding of that word and how it kind of applies to yourself. So I think like with most even identities. I think oftentimes we stop with like when somebody says, oh, I'm Jewish or I'm Christian or I'm whatever, like, you know everything about them. And that's not true. You need to be able to ask more questions, because there are lots of ways that you can kind of present as a non-binary person or a Jew or a Christian or queer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things when you were, Evan says, thank you. One of the things that came up for me when you were talking about, and this is maybe what I heard, and maybe it wasn't what you said, but in the beginning, when I first started interviewing drag artists, part of my hope was to be able to talk about gender and expression and those sorts of things in somewhat of a personal way. But I felt like as a drag artist, there's kind of this element of putting yourself out in the world in a certain way that for some reason it felt more appropriate or more comfortable to begin to have some of those conversations about transness and gender and sexuality, rather than actually say, hey, trans person, like, let's talk about your spirituality or whatever. It seemed like there was kind of almost a more appropriateness, at least in my initial, where I was at in my understanding of things, where it felt more appropriate. Is that kind of like what you were saying, in the sense of like, kind of you were doing the non-binary and kind of being out and talking about it, and then drag came in and like, I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Like, I think like, and it's so funny for me because like I'm baby. Like I like Layah is like so new for me, and like she's teaching me how to love myself in so many different ways. I was like working my number today that I'm doing tonight, 9:30 at the Annoyance for Chicago folks. And with my drag dad, and we were trying to like figure out the arc of the story, and we landed at like it's about hope that goes to power. And then I was like, well, what happens next? And my drag dad laughed at me, and he was like, so funny, sounds like what you're like working on in life now.
Yeah.
And that is like the exact conversation I had with my therapist, is like I'm always like focused on what's happening next, and like the advice that she gave me was to like bring in joy and bring in like fun and like love, like instead of focusing on what happens next. And so like my drag dad asking me that, like, and then thinking back to that, I was like, oh shoot, like I cracked the end of the number. Like the objective at the end of the number is to like discover fun and discover joy. And like, versus if I was working like a piece by myself, like without Layah, it's like that conversation that I just said right now, and like say that out loud. And like I feel like then I'm, in a lot of ways, sometimes I'm putting my therapy session like out there for people to make judgments on, or like decide what they think, like from like every individual word. But drag is so interpretative, and that's the words that came out of my mouth was funny, interpretive. And because like if I send you this art piece of like my intention of what this lyric means, like I know that, and I can give you as best as I can like what I think that intention is. But at the end of the day, it's whatever you take from it. And it's not about me telling you exactly what to think. And that's why I like drag more than theater.
And and the thing that's kind of magic about that is that it can still impact you in a very specific way, without having to have that layer of specificity. Because I feel like I've always been that kind of a drag artist too. It's like, I want to make you cry. I want to make you think. I want you to love yourself. I want you to be like, you know what I mean? And people are like, can't we just like kiki and have fun, And so, but even when you're trying to get people to go through something, I was beginning to notice how being too specific actually made less room for more people to feel connected to your work.
Correct. And like that's why I'm starting to fall in love with this art form, is like not only have I found like the actual like crafting, like spending time like making this dress. I'm like, it's like this rope harness situation that I made inspired off of tzit knots, which is like the knots at the end of a tallis, which you wear around like to pray. So like even in crafting it, like I said the prayer in between each knot that you say before you like actually tie the knot. So there's a meditative aspect, like there's a meditative spirituality for me in the act of like building it and making it.
Yeah,
is like the one part. And then I think the other part is like, then when I get up there, like it is about fun at the end of the day for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think oftentimes, like religion or spirituality seems so counter to sexuality. But I also know in like your bio and stuff, and maybe even in some of the rest of the garment, it kind of reads a little kink or a little more sexual. So how is the integration of your sexuality and spirituality? How does that play out?
Yeah. I'm super excited about this number that I'm about to do because it's 100% like in that through line and is so Layah of how these two things work together. The number is about the idea of like putting trust in God and like having God like submit like to me and like have an exchange, a power exchange of submission. And I think that like exploring power and religion in general is just interesting. And um and I've been reading a lot on the idea of spiritual kink and what it means to me, and how like reaching ultimate subspace can be the time in which you ultimately like can connect to God, because it's something that's far beyond your like your realm of consciousness. So like in some ways I feel like Layah as the dominatrix, like what I'm asking the audience sometimes is like to submit to me, and like and in that way put trust that like I have trust that like autonomy, that God is with me. And so in the act of the audience submitting to me, like I want the audience to put trust in submitting themselves into something beyond themselves.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's like kind of the paradoxicalness of submission and like say being the sub, if you will, is that like there's this perception that to be submissive is to be of least power or to give up power, when ultimately without submission there's nothing, like there's nothing for the other person, right? Like you really are the one, I guess, I think, in control, or you have the power, because without submitting, there's nothing for somebody else in a healthy, like in a healthy, loving, positive way.
Yeah, for sure. And then also the integration of kink and slavery, and like how like Jews like were like enslaved from the like out of the depths of Egypt. Passover's coming up, in which is like a super big kink holiday. Purim just happened, which is like a super big drag holiday, because it's like Jewish Halloween. Everyone dresses up in costumes. And Passover is about like the exile. Like we've been through all this shit, and then we're leaving. We're leaving to find Mitzrayim, which is like which translates to the narrow place. And when I teach about Passover, I talk a lot about where do we find that narrow place, like within our hearts. And I think that has like a very like kink mirror into like building your own personal Mitzrayim. Building your own personal Mitzrayim, that's like building a scene. Anything can happen in a scene with your scene partner. You're coming up with like What agreements do you have in place? What is that contract that you have, like, for you to feel spiritual submission and sexual submission at the same time? Like, where are you able to like put trust into someone else, to let your body go, to like feel ecstasy? And like, how do you reach Mitzrayim together? How do you reach that narrow place? And
Yeah.
what parts of yourself are you enslaved to? Like, that also makes me think of like degradation too. Like why does that like get people high or whatever? Because like there's a release of this idea of like, yes, I am a slave to myself in some ways, and like creating acceptance around that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think kink is one of those things that is even somewhat taboo. I think even within somewhat like maybe queer or even spiritual settings. And I think even for myself, I found myself having these sexual kinks and at first having a lot of judgment about them personally. And then eventually getting to a place where I could be like, okay, but like, why? Like instead of like trying to change it or observe it, or like, but to observe it and to kind of try to understand, okay, well, I'm drawn to this and I'm wanting to do it and I do it. What is it doing for me, rather than trying to judge it as like a bad thing? And it was really important for me to be able to kind of be more okay with it, because when I was fighting it, then it was dangerous, because I wasn't in the right settings and in the right environments, and I really wasn't prepared to do kind of the harm reductive stuff that you need to do in any sort of relationship. But I think in particular around that as well, which I think we can learn in spiritual settings as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that I love the idea of prayer as a form of aftercare. Like being able to like thank your scene partner for sorry, I also should like take a back for like step back for like anyone who like doesn't know the kink world. So a scene is like what you call the negotiation that you do with said other person in
or persons, I guess.
or person yeah
yeah,
or of person like in said place. The agreement is made before, and what you've decided you're going to do is what creates the scene. Anyway, what was I saying about before scene? Yes, prayer. Okay, so prayer is a form of aftercare. I think that like also prayer as a form of aftercare can honor the moment and the connection that you shared like with the other person, and be able to create the value of or intentionality behind what you did. And also like in general, like being more intentional during sexual situations like can help you to slow down and like not mess up, and like making sure that you're like taking care of the other person that's in front of you. Because I think like a lot of times like why things go wrong is because like there's less intentionality behind like what you're doing, and it's a tool for you to be able to be there and to be present.
So not to cause harm, and so that your intentions can actually be met, I was what was the question? I was going to say something, but I swear I lose it at least once in every interview. So you yourself seem super integrated with your sexuality, your spirituality, your gender. Sounds like even your occupation, that a lot of things are very integrated. However, you are in these spots that maybe you aren't able to be. I don't know if like you're fully integrated, but maybe not everyone's connecting to that part, to all parts of yourself. How can you talk a little bit more about that?
Ooh. Yeah.
Or have you noticed that? Like, and do you think that maybe is your pull to try to get them to be more whole? Like, Like
I
to
don't
bring
want to
those
change
other.
anyone's mind. It's not my
Yeah.
job to change people's mind.
Mhm.
My job is to build community. And I once had someone in my line of work say, like, the way we combat anti-Semitism is like having Shabbat and inviting non-Jews to our Shabbat table. And like the purpose of that for me is to build community. There are so
Mhm.
many people out there who don't even know like that Jews exist or
Yeah.
know what Jews do or how Jews pray or what it means for Jews to be Jewish. So I've been holding these Friday night Shabbats where I often invite many of my friends who aren't Jewish to come, and I teach them the Shabbat prayers, and many of them now know some of the Shabbat prayers just from like coming, and they're not
Mhm.
Jewish. And now when they see another Jewish person or they meet another Jewish person, they can say, "Oh, like that's a thing I know about Judaism." So like
Mhm.
there's a huge part, I think, of religion sometimes like that integrates with trauma where people everyone's just like out to convert everyone. Like
Mhm.
I'm not there. Like I'm out to like let people know that Jews exist.
Right.
And I think
But
that,
there,
yeah.
yeah. But there's kind of the hope of creating connection. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and it, because I think that's one of the things that I'm learning with my aunt, who's a conservative Christian, in relationship to her, how important it is for me to learn more about her spirituality and how she sees the world, just to even be in conversation with her. Because there are times when I can participate in what works for her in a way that feels okay for me, that I could actually benefit from. But it did take me a little while to kind of get there. Um, there is a question and a comment. Evan, again, hey, Evan, so glad that you're with us. Evan says, I'm currently finding my identity for the first time in my life, letting who I am see the light of day. How I thought of myself and how I saw myself was for survival. Spirituality has had a large role in this process. I used to perform in drag, it's a part of me, but I am not sure where it fits in or how to begin. Any suggestions? By the way, Madonna has used religion in her art for over 40 years, as well as sexy, kink, spirituality. What do you look to as a who do you look to as a role model or inspiration? There's two questions there. Do you want to jump on either of those?
Yeah. There's something in just like in this question that like made me think of something. In college I used to in my last year, I used to live by this phrase I made up called like I want to live like I'm living, not like I'm
Mm,
surviving. And
yeah.
I think like being able to build a world that feels that way is important to me. Um, Let me answer the first part question. Not sure where it fits in. Any suggestions? I guess like go, I mean, go back to where you come from.
Mm,
I think everyone comes from somewhere. Everyone has ancestors somewhere. And I think being able to do research and like navigating, or if you have grandparents that are still alive, like talk to your grandparents and talk to them about like what they remember about like how they got here and like their lives and where they come from. And I
mhm,
think that like a lot of like the secret of finding who you are always like not always but can come from like gathering information about like where the other people in your life come from. And then I think after you've done that and you find like your ancestry, then it's the Google of like, well, like what did your ancestry think about these things? And
mm,
you tap into finding the stories that aren't commonly told or
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the best things that we can do, which I think sometimes feels odd, but it's like I think we have to get to a place where we can do drag and we can be spiritual and we can do all these sorts of things that like Evan had mentioned as well. But being able to then do drag without letting go of those things. And I think those are the things that make us uniquely us. That's what sets drag artists apart from other drag artists, is that I think they're able to bring in other parts of themselves or other parts of their life in order to really add more character or more, I guess, depth, if you will, to that as well.
Yeah.
And then there was the question about role models. Who would you say are your role models or your inspiration?
Ooh, like in my drag or
Or
like in
I
life?
think in any of that, yeah.
My drag. Who is Layah? Oh God. Um, I don't know if she'll ever see this, but there's a student of mine who I can think of who every time I see her and the way that she interacts in class, like I see Layah in her. And I think it's the way, like it's her tenacity, it's like her fight. And like at her bat mitzvah, like her mom described her as like someone who was like so unbelievably stubborn that like when like she said, okay, everyone, we're leaving the sidewalk, like Maya would never leave the sidewalk. And and like the way that she speaks about her opinions are like so articulate, and like the way in which like she is like a strong feminist and like strongly like identifies as a woman, like her B'nai mitzvah speech is like, I don't want to call it a Kabbalat mitzvah, it's a bat mitzvah. This is my bat mitzvah and we should change it to let everyone decide what it should be called, and I want this to be my bat mitzvah. Like that sort of energy from a 13-year-old like inspires me so much to be like, look, like I don't know like how much of like my girlhood life that I ever had is something that like I ever really connected to. Like I will never have like long brown like stereotypically like Jewish hair. Like I had like a big red Jewish afro as a girl, and like everyone was obsessed with my hair. Like I will never look like the kind of like pretty girl like on The Bachelorette, but like I doing drag now, I get to redo womanhood in a way that's like defining femininity on my own terms. And like when I watch Maya like walk throughout the world, like it reminds me that like, yeah, like if I were to redo it all over again, like I would be that have like that stubborn and that strong-minded and like comfortable. And I think like I take that like as a huge part of Layah. And I think no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think in some ways you weren't necessarily pushed to that sort of because I would say in some ways you have kind of that, at least I think from somebody else's perspective, right? But I can also see how like in some ways you might be experiencing that differently than maybe how somebody else is perceiving you.
For sure. Like I definitely think I've always been like tenacious and stubborn and all of those things as a child, but I think that the times in which I was experiencing that and into adulthood, I never felt sexy in that. And I think that Layah combined with that kind of tenacity and like grit and like ability to be like, no, like this is my stage, bitch. Like, like allows me to like, I don't know. Those are the things that allow me to redo it again on my terms.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I usually try to keep this around 45 minutes. We're at that 45-minute mark. No, that's okay. So, but I did want to give you an opportunity to speak to something maybe that we haven't got a chance to speak to yet, or if you'd like to just restate something that you think is important, now is the time to do that.
Yeah, just a little plug. I will be 9:30 tonight at the Annoyance in Chicago, Illinois. And then also at Dorothy in the gender variety show next Thursday.
Awesome. Great. And I will have Layah's I will run their socials across the bottom of the screen right now. Also, you can find it in the description, links in the description of the video or the podcast, wherever you're listening or watching. Thank you so much for, for doing this evening. I wish you I want to say break a leg, I guess, tonight
Yeah.
with your show. And I just wanted to also thank Evan says, I didn't mean to interrupt the interview. The interview is allowing a place for me to ask these questions. Thank you for your time, patience, understanding, and sharing your experience. And I just wanted to say you are not interrupting at all. You're just adding to the conversation. And I know myself, and I believe Layah is very appreciative that you're willing to kind of engage with us so that we could have more people in the conversation. Awesome. Well, thank you so very much. Everybody have a really great night. And I'll see you in the next video. That sounds like something a YouTuber would say. All right. Take care and bye-bye.
Bye.